Hey everybody, welcome back to Conquest of Ea. And this week I actually wanted to do a video that I probably should have done right out from the start and cover why I like Bellum's Conquest miniature war game so much and why I recommend it to so many people. A little history about my wargaming background. I started when I was in high school playing Warhammer Fantasy. I really enjoyed building the models, painting, which is something not a lot of people did, but appealed to me and some of my friends. And I was pretty bummed when I was a little older and Games Workshop killed off the old world because it just had such a rich background of lore and the gameplay was very fun, although it was, at that point, admittedly it was bloated, because the rules pile on and the end times rules were getting a little crazy. But I still enjoyed playing my dwarves, and then there was no real replacement that came, because Age of Sigmar, the release of that was, I'll just call it a catastrophe, I guess. But there was no rank and playing fantasy miniature war game at the time, and so I kind of moved away from it and started playing 40k more competitively. And I've played 40k, since around that time in tournaments, had a lot of fun, and we all know that 40k is not the most balanced game in the world, especially with the latest balance patch that's coming out soon in January, but that's for a different channel and a different video. But I still had fun playing it. I had fun playing my GSC, but I was still looking for something to fill the void of a rank and flank miniature game. Where you have square bases, things like putting chaff in front of your hard-hitting units, flanking units, things like that really mattered. And I looked around and I played a little Song of Ice and Fire, which is actually very fun, but that to me is more like a board game with the tactics board and the card command mechanics and just, 4 to 5 to 6 actual units on the table. And I was really looking for something that had more units on the table, but I didn't really want to play a mass battle fantasy game that I was familiar with from the past, hundreds of models. And that's kind of why Warhammer, the old world, Games Workshop blew it up, right? It wasn't sustainable to have new players come in and buy 200 Skaven slaves if they wanted to play Skaven, or buy, a billion skeletons if they wanted to play vampire counts. So games recognized that and started scaling back to kind of fill that void. I even played a little bit of Ninth Age with a buddy, and while I liked it, it's too complex for me. It's too cumbersome and just takes too long to kind of figure it out. And then it's a definitely better rule set than old Warhammer Fantasy was. You can use the same models, which is nice, and it's all free, which is a bonus. But it'll be tough to get newer players into that game. It's not backed by a company. That's just being held alive by the community, which is a strong one, but as soon as something newer comes along, people will leave that. So eventually I found Conquest by Bellum Games. I actually saw it over on Frontline Gaming, where I read some articles when it first came out, and I thought it was really interesting how the units come on the board with a roll of dice. The card activated mechanic really interested me, but then I didn't really pick it up and play it at that time. It wasn't until a few months ago I actually bought in, while I was discussing with an old buddy that I used to play Warhammer Fantasy with, that we were kind of looking for a new war game, and we wanted something that was like old Warhammer Fantasy, and we felt, because we come from the background of more competitive players, him way more than me, but we wanted something that felt closer to that chess feel, that feels like my moves on the table actually matter, and what I do can win me the game, and it doesn't really matter what army you brought, as long as you didn't bring anything insanely bad, and it didn't matter what army I brought, we each have roughly an equal chance to win. So then I stumbled on a Conquest and think I found that game in that, and so in this video we're going to cover 3 of the main reasons why I think Conquest is such a great miniature war game. And if you're looking for something new and streamlined and from a great company, this is definitely a reason that Conquest appealed to me so much. And it's just these models. They're amazing. The original models, I got the original starter set with 100 Kingdoms and Spires. Definitely don't look like that guy, the Sea Yatnar, but they're still good. But as time has gone on, Bellum has really improved their manufacturing of the models. There's instructions in the kits now. The models are easier to build. Those Incarnate Sentinels are now plastic instead of resin, so they're actually cheaper than they were. And those new, I believe they're called initiates for their Dwaycombe, look amazing. And every army has this aesthetic, feels right at home in the world of Aya that Parabellum has created. The models are actually a little scaled up from like a regular 28mm scale that you might be used to from Games Workshop or other companies. And I think they're 32mm or a little bigger even. Like my Men-at-Arms, for example, for my 100 Kingdoms are the size of like a Primary Space Marine almost. So they're really easy to paint. They look great on the table because you don't have, as you can see there, that's a unit of 12 with 3 stands. You don't have 40 blocks of actual troops lined up all the time, so you want those miniatures to be bigger to take up more space. The models are beautiful. You still need something that draws you in to that world that the game is creating. That's very important for a lot of players. Maybe not so much for the competitive players out there, although a lot of the competitive 40K players I know love their army, love the backstory of their armies. And so I still feel like it's important to build that foundation of lore that players can dive into. And Parabellum has done, I think, the best job I've ever seen. That's to include Warhammer Fantasy in creating a world that you feel like you know what's going on, you know what all the factions kind of, what they represent, what they're doing in the world, and how it all meshes together. I can't even imagine how much time it took to actually put all this lore together. It's probably harder than writing an actual fantasy book because you know, for that, you know your setting, you have your beginning, middle, and end, but this is more of like a fantasy series like Game of Thrones where it's thousands of pages probably is sitting around in Parabellum's offices. So if you go over to Parabellum's website and just under the world, the lore of Conquest down here at the bottom, and that's going to take you right to the page talking about Aya, and that is the actual world, like Earth. We live on Earth. The people in Conquest live on Aya. And it's going to give you a background of how all the factions came to be, what happened to kind of get the 100 Kingdoms split from the Old Dominion, how the Nords were born, and you can go through the Genesis story of the world, the history, and then there's just a ton of lore on the factions, and even short stories and an art gallery. So you can see here, the game has 7 factions currently, well, with city-states actually coming soon, in January, I believe, or February. And clicking on any of the factions gets you even more in-depth lore behind that faction, their history, the sub-factions, the forces that you actually can take on the table. And the spotlight is just some interesting stories, like this is about Hunter Cadre, for example, and characters that are in the living world that Parabellum has created. So you have the world and the Conquest living world for the lore. And this is something actually really cool that Parabellum does. I'm sure companies have done this in the past, but I don't know if they've done such an in-depth and good job with the story progression of a war game. So you can see the map of Aya here, and currently you can click on the characters and see their location and read their actual story that's within the game of Conquest. And if you make an account on the Parabellum website, you can actually make decisions and vote on what happens to these characters, which is really cool, and that drives the story. And I believe 2+ Stuff actually just did an interview with the creators of Conquest, and they said, you know, they kind of know basically where they want to go with the character story arc and how they're going to get there. Not how they're going to get there, they know where they want to go, but how they get there is going to be primarily derived from the players' votes and how the living world goes. And the living world currently actually is focused on Project 8, which is Parabellum's 8th army that's going to release after City-States, is being voted on by the players. This is the best example I can give of why Parabellum is such a great games company. They really take player feedback, they're active, the creators are active members on their Discord, and they show this. I believe the 6th army was voted on as well. That was a little bit before I started playing the game. But now you have a choice of 3, and everyone gets votes, and it's a 4-tiered, I believe, system to vote on the armies. And as those tiers start going through December 26th through January 27th, you're going to see more and more as far as their lore, artwork on the factions, and kind of how they play. And players will be able to cast their votes to see what comes out. And between the 3 factions here, Sellswords or Dogs of War, Sorcerer Kings, and Hell. And as the vote goes on, more information will be released on these dates here, which is very cool. The lore and the models, at least to me, look amazing and definitely draw people in, but all that would be for nothing if the game actually wasn't supported and had a solid rule set. And after playing many games, I can tell you that I absolutely love it, and I think it is very, very well tuned and feels great. And some fantasy war games, rank and flank games, like Ninth Age, like Warhammer Fantasy from 8th edition, are just a little too crunchy and a little too, precise in the movements, and, those games ended up, some of them could take 5 hours. And then on the other side, you have A Song of Ice and Fire, which the movement is very fluid, very fast. You have just 5 units on the table. And I think Conquest falls directly in the center of those two games, where you have more models, more units on the table. You have that classic character building that you had from Warhammer Fantasy, but the movement is a little more fluid and forgiving than like Ninth Age or Warhammer Fantasy. So to look at the actual game, all the rules are free on Bellum's website, and they actually have Conquest: The Last Argument of Kings, which is their mass battle fantasy war game, like the classic rank and flank games, square bases that people are used to, and they have Conquest: First Blood, which is their skirmish game. As you notice from the models, they all can come off of those stands, they're called, the square stands, to be single circular based miniatures. That was really hard to say. And that is how you use them in actually Conquest: First Blood. So if you go straight over to Conquest: First Blood, you can jump into the lore of the game, but the important part is all the core rules come here, different languages, completely for free in PDF form. They actually sell actual rulebooks as well, but if you don't want to buy one, or because obviously the rulebooks get updated, they're on version 1.5 of the game currently, which actually version 2 is set to come out, I believe, in February. This gets updated for free, and this is the current rulebook of the game. For rules, all the army lists are also for free, that you can look at the PDF files of the army list. It'll list the forces, how many points they cost, what upgrades the character can get, and the errata, obviously. And the errata, they do pretty frequently. As units come out, they'll usually get the errata, and if they see things, it's still a smaller game, so there's not 200 people tournaments being played, although I would bet that's coming within this next, maybe not year, maybe the year after 2024. This game is definitely going to keep growing larger and larger, just because the company supports it, and more people are going to start playing tournaments of it. But this isn't the only place you actually can look at your army list. You could write your army list in pen and paper like back in the old days, but Bellum has a great army builder that they just updated, so everything is working great in here for free on their website. You can browse the factions to look at the factions, and go to Prepare for War and build your army list. Oh look, I already have my 100 Kingdoms January tournament in here. If any of my wargaming group sees this, you're not going to see my actual list yet, so don't get too excited. You can look at all the characters that come up and put them in your army and create warbands. So Conquest is pretty unique in your army is built by picking characters first that will let you have a warband, and you put regiments in those warbands. But not every regiment or unit is accessible to every character. So for example, my Imperial Officer, as a mainstay, he can take Imperial Ranger Corps, which actually aren't out yet, Men-at-Arms, Mercenary Crossbowmen, Militia Bowmen, and some Steel Legion Hunter Cadres restricted. But if you look at my Mounted Noble Lord, he can take kind of the same mainstays, except for Household Guard are added, but you can see that the restricted are completely different. There were no Household Knights or Longbowmen or Mounted Squires even available to the Imperial Officer. And this is a really cool way that Bellum kind of balances the armies. So if you want access to, in a 100 Kingdoms example, Steel Legion, which are really, really strong, heavily armored, full plate, great sword wielding guys, you have to take the Imperial Officer, which he's not bad. He actually can get some upgrades, which we'll go over in a second, that can make them a lot better as well. But he's just not a close combat powerhouse, and he never will be as strong in close combat as the Mounted Noble Lord. So each character also like the days of Warhammer Fantasy when you could buy magic items and banners and things like that for your characters, Bellum has really gone to the next level of character customization. I can't even calculate how many different characters you can make with this system, because each character in all the armies have, 100 Kingdoms call them heirlooms. They're basically their relics or their magic items. And you'll see, if you've played Warhammer games before, you're going to be used to banners, armor, weapons. These are the kind of things that they can buy that we're probably all used to in other fantasy war games. But then characters have things like the Imperial Officer has battlefield drills. And that lets him, because he's represented as this army officer who drills his units, they get bonuses if you pay the points for him being in that unit. For example, Bastion will give them better defense, kind of representing them getting in their phalanx and getting behind their shields, or Double Time will represent them marching faster, or Murderous Volley will represent them actually shooting upon his command, which is really cool. And then all the characters in the game can take different kinds of masteries, which is how you can really tailor your character of how they've been trained basically in their past. So some characters can take tactical, combat, and arcane. Some can just take combat and tactical, and there'll be different points that you can take. For example, a combat one for 10 points that's actually pretty good is Disorienting Strikes. So any character that's in a duel with another character, when they're fighting you, they're going to get -1 to their clash, or -1 to hit you. And there's all different kinds of things you can do with the masteries. And then finally, infantry characters, cavalry characters can't have a retinue, can take other models on their stand to buff up things that they do in the game. And this represents advisors, bodyguards, extra fighters that the character is going to take that help them out in the game, and they just cost points. A popular thing that I do in my 100 Kingdoms list, for example, is take a tier 3. It's a tiered system, so each time you take a tier, you pay 10, 15, and then 25 points, all adding up. I take a tier 3 Imperial Officer to give him reroll 1 resolve test or morale test per each tier, which I always forget. I never remember to do that. And then he gets an additional battlefield drill, like we saw from the masteries. And then tier 3, finally, it lets the regiment he's in, which is going to be the Steel Legion in my list, get the flank special rule, which means you don't have to roll for them to come on the board. They automatically come on, and they'll actually be able to move 3 times with that mastery that I stacked on there. I'm sorry, not mastery, battlefield drill of Double Time. So that's just one example of a character you can build that has a very specific purpose in the game to get my Steel Legion on the board faster. And all the other factions have very, very different and varied ways of building different characters that do different things. The Spires, for example, can build a healing character. The Nords, or like the Vikings of the setting, can build really, really intense close combat characters that are great at dueling. So those are just some of the main reasons that I think Conquest is such a great war game, and Bellum's doing a great job of releasing things for it and keeping the rules up to date. I really recommend it to anyone looking for a fast-paced rank and flank game that you're not going to get bogged down in the rules too much. While the rules are tight, they let things happen that other rank and flank games, like, you don't need a mathematics degree to play this game and move your models, which I really appreciate. So if you are convinced by my sales pitch, basically, you can definitely go over to Frontline Gaming, where they sell Conquest stuff. I have an affiliate link with them down in the description of the video. I appreciate any support that you can lend that way, but if that's not the way you want to support the channel, I definitely still appreciate a subscribe, a like, a comment, anything, because all of these things help grow the channel, help get more eyes looking at the Conquest wargame, and grow the community, which is awesome as far as I'm concerned. So thanks everybody for listening, and good luck in your Conquest games out there, and good luck starting your armies. Hopefully I've convinced you.